People sometimes ask me why a pastor would decide to run for the U.S. Senate. My answer is simple. I've always felt that my impact does not stop at the church door. That's actually where it starts. And I love this country and believe that what makes America so great is that we've always had a path to make it greater. I'm Raphael Warnock, and whether you congregate in a church, synagogue, or at kitchen tables across Georgia, we can all agree that Washington could use some moral leadership. That's why I approve this message.
Welcome to the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Tuesday, December the 15th, 2020.
For Joseph R. Biden of Delaware, a Democrat, ayes 55, noes 0.
That was the moment in California yesterday that the Electoral College gave Joe Biden and Kamala Harris an Electoral College victory, making official Joe Biden as the next president of the United States of America. A few short moments later, this happened.
For Senator Kamala D. Harris of California, a Democrat, ayes 55, noes 0.
Kamala Harris making history in the Electoral College in California. California's own Kamala Harris became the first female vice president via the Electoral College confirmation process. Both Kamala Harris and Joe Biden will be taking the oath of office in just over 5 weeks' time. On this episode of The Politicrat, a look back at some of the events of yesterday in the Electoral College, Joe Biden's speech, and what we must do next, not only to preserve the democratic process as very, very tenuous as it is, but also what kind of agenda we must have when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are sworn into office on January the 20th, 2021. That all coming up next.
Today, a member of the Electoral College, representing the certified winner, cast their votes for president and vice president of the United States in an act just as old as our nation itself. And once again, in America, the rule of law, our Constitution, and the will of the people prevailed. Our democracy pushed, tested, threatened, proved to be resilient, true, and strong. The Electoral College votes, which occurred today, reflect the fact that even in the face of a public health crisis unlike anything we've experienced in our lifetimes, the people voted. They voted in record numbers. More Americans voted this year than have ever voted in the history of the United States of America. Over 155 million Americans were determined to have their voices heard and their votes counted. In the start of this pandemic, this crisis, many were wondering how many Americans would actually vote at all. But those fears proved to be unfounded. We saw something very few predicted, even thought possible. the biggest voter turnout in the history of the United States of America. A number so big that this election now ranks as the clearest demonstration of the true will of the American people. One of the most amazing demonstrations of civic duty we've ever seen in our country. It should be celebrated, not attacked. More than 81 million of those votes were cast for me and Vice President-elect Harris. That, too, is a record. More than any ticket has received in the history of America. It represents a winning margin of more than 7 million votes over the number of votes cast for my opponent. Together, Vice President-elect Harris and I earned 306 electoral votes, well exceeding the 270 electoral votes needed to secure victory. 306 electoral votes is the same number of electoral votes that Donald Trump and Vice President Pence received when they won in 2016. Excuse me. At the time, President Trump called the Electoral College tally a landslide. By his own standards, these numbers represented a clear victory then, and I respectfully suggest they do so now. If anyone didn't know before, they know now. What beats deep in the hearts of the American people is this: democracy. The right to be heard, to have your vote counted, to choose leaders of this nation, to govern ourselves. In America, politicians don't take power. People grant power to them. The flame of democracy was lit in this nation a long time ago. And we now know nothing, not even a pandemic or an abuse of power, can extinguish that flame. And as the people kept it aflame, so too did courageous state and local officials and election workers. American democracy works because America makes it work at a local level.
The news has been very grim this whole year. And we are now roughly 2.5 weeks away from the end of 2020. I cannot wait, and I'm sure you cannot wait, to put this calendar year in the rearview mirror. The news yesterday that the United States of America has passed 300,000 people now dead from the coronavirus, COVID-19 disease. That is a number that is not only incomprehensible, but deeply painful and dispiriting. People have tuned out. Some people are numb. Some people aren't even registering just how many people that is. It is important to put faces and names behind these numbers. It is something that I have often expressed on this podcast. And last week, Leonora Lapita Anton, the Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter of the Tampa Bay Times, joined me here to share some stories of the people who are no longer here. And as I had expressed during the conversation that we had, is that we needed to put the stories of the people who passed and also be mindful of what has happened and what we as a country are doing to lessen this massive loss of life. And one of the things that was so important about that conversation last week was to make it very clear that there is a human cost here. It is so important for us to recognize that. And not only that, but to honor and respect those who are no longer here and honor and remember them We should and must never forget any of these people, because at the end of the day, as this holiday season continues on, and particularly in the next 10 days and beyond, there are going to be families, many families across these United States and around the world, who will be experiencing a Christmas, a Hanukkah, a Kwanzaa, and any other holiday during this season without loved ones, without friends, without people that they knew. And it is up to us to continue to wear a mask, to wear gloves, to physically distance. And even when a vaccine arrives, it is critically important that when that vaccine is administered, that people continue to wear masks and continue to physically distance. These are the net effects of everything that has happened. We have to be responsible and we have to do our job. We will have a new administration in just over 5 weeks. And it is important that they do all they can, and they are working right now to get the message. And we are having an earthquake, literally. There was some shaking right now, honestly. You may have been able to hear it. Wow. So I will continue on. That was probably about 5 to 10 seconds of shaking. But it was definitely felt here. So being here in California, we do go through these things. And so some of these are not too fierce in terms of shaking, and some of them are a lot fiercer. This one probably, I would say, was around a 4 point something on the Richter scale, which for here is fairly tame. For those people who live in California, who've been here for a long time, it's not really much of a big deal. You start to get people's attentions here in California once the shaking gets to a 6 or above. That's when people start to really look around. But I just want to say that it is important that we do practice all of the things we need to practice. And the new administration coming in here in the U.S. will be hard at work. And we must be too. We cannot let our guard down. One more thing I do want to mention is that we also lost a very bright star, someone who was one of the hardest workers in show business, Anne Reinking. It's hard to believe that she's not here, and I found that out on Twitter. And what a shock, a real shock. I mean, I did not know anything at all that she was no longer here, and then boom. Anne Reinking was a Broadway phenomenon and one of the great actors, someone who was a relentless worker, passionate, dedicated, and also very, very good and an excellent actor. Very good at what she did, and I must say, a tremendous person. And may she rest in power. Anne Reinking, one of the real greats, someone who really blazed a trail and gave countless millions of people joy, inspiration, and a lot of pure spirit and heart. Rest in power, Anne. Welcome back. So, a few moments to digest what you may have heard. I don't know if you heard that shaking, but I do want to say that there were actually 2 earthquakes that occurred. One of them was 3.7 on the magnitude scale, 3.7 magnitude. That was here in Northern California, in a place called Anderson Lake, which is just an hour or so south of San Francisco. That lasted for a few seconds, and then literally it felt like it was literally less than 10 seconds later, a second earthquake from the same area, Anderson Lake, that was felt here in San Francisco, and it was at 3.6 on the scale. So slightly less, but the shaking combined felt like close to 10 seconds or so. But it was two different earthquakes separated by literally a few seconds. So they were happening almost concurrently. No news of any damage yet, but that is such is life here in California. We do get earthquakes, and that's one of the reasons why lots of people are hesitant to come here and live here, because despite the lovely weather that we get and a number of other positive, really good things about being in California, not homelessness, that's not a good thing. But one of the other, things is the beauty of this place. This is a place that, of course, belonged to the Mexicans. This is their land, and it's beautiful land, and it really does belong to them, taken from them by force. So I do want to get to that as well. I want to just mention that. But those two earthquakes, when you're doing a podcast or anything, whatever you're doing, it does jolt you, because you just don't know. You just don't know when you're going to get these things. But again, it was relatively small in terms of its size and magnitude. For those who aren't used to earthquakes, though, this might have been a real scare for you. So if you are here in Northern California, in the San Francisco Bay Area, or in the peninsula here in Northern California, and you've never experienced an earthquake before, this may have been a little unnerving for you, even though it was, quote-unquote, just a 3.7 and a 3.6. Not often that you get two earthquakes together like that, pretty much on top of each other. I mean, obviously there are aftershocks and tremors and things that happen, but when you have two lead quakes like that, not something that I've experienced, at least all the time, all the years I've been here. But enough about earthquake talk. That's not what the focus of this podcast episode is. It's about what we saw, an earthquake in terms of the size of Joe Biden's and Kamala Harris's victory in the Electoral College. It was upheld, and it was never going to be in doubt. It was certified and confirmed by all of the reporting states. All of the states reported their results, and they did the will of the people. Remember, in the Electoral College, people do not vote for the president and vice president directly. They vote for the electors in their states, who then are charged with the responsibility of voting for the person who won the most popular votes in the state. That's how the Electoral College works. Now I say, get rid of and abolish the Electoral College. Sure, Joe Biden won this time, but the Electoral College is a way of diverting and subverting the will of the people. The Electoral College is a way of candidates not going to all 50 states and only going to 9 or 10 states. Just think about it. In this American system, there is really a 2-year campaign for president. It's nearly 2 years long. You know the average time of most countries who have campaigns for their highest office? Do you know what the average time of campaigning is? The average length of campaigns in an election season in any country? It's about 3 to 4 weeks. Literally, 3 to 4 weeks. And here in the United States, it's almost 2 years. We have to change that too. by the way. We really do. All of this money and resources. I mean, it's a big country, yes, but my goodness me, could we just have a campaign that's distilled down to 3 months? I mean, you would be able to live with that, wouldn't you? If we cut the campaign length from 2 years or a year and a half down to 3 months, couldn't you live with that? I think it would force the candidates to work much, much harder. I think it would force the candidates to travel more. It would force them, if we had no electoral college, to really reach out to people in all kinds of places, not just in the 10 states that the candidates tend to go to. And you can name the 10 states: Florida, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Texas, Ohio. I mean, I've mentioned, 7 right there? There's a couple others: Nevada, Arizona. 8 or 9. So I've mentioned about 8 or 9 states, thereabouts, roughly. We need to get rid of the Electoral College. And we need to, I think, limit the amount of campaign time there is. There's just too much of it. People get turned off. People, they just tune out. And then they have to be prodded into voting a year and a half later. And I think there's got to be a better way. So that's one thing I proffer, even before getting into the meat and the bones, or rather the fish and the bones, since I'm a pescatarian. Let's really get into that a bit here, because I do think it's important to look back at what we've just seen here these last 5 weeks, because 5 weeks from now, plus 1 day, 5 weeks and 1 day from today, we are going to be having the swearing in of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And there will be history there, of course. The first female vice president, the first black woman, the first South Asian woman of the South Asian background, the first person from California who is a Democrat, who will be in the White House in some way, shape, or form, in terms of one of the top 2 positions of governing power in the executive branch. There's so many firsts. Joe Biden will be the oldest person ever to be sworn in as president at 78 years old. So there's lots of firsts. He will be only the second Catholic to be sworn in as president. The other was JFK in 1961. So there's all of those things. And look, what we call democracy, and I put that in quotes because for a great many of us in this country, it has never existed. For black folk, it definitely has not. For Native Americans, it definitely has not. And for brown people, it has not either. So that's why I put quotation marks around that. However, as far as the democratic process is concerned, 2020, at least in terms of the elections process, showed that there is a process that exists and that can hold fast. And it managed to. Despite the long lines, despite the Republican attacks on it, Trump's attacks on it, the democratic process, allowing people to early vote, allowing people to drop off ballots at ballot boxes, even though Texas, through Greg Abbott, the Republican governor, said, no, every county, you can only drop it off at one place in the entire county, trying to restrict and constrict your time and voting power. The process held firm despite the threats against the very process that we participated in over these last 2 months, from September 4th, a Friday, up through November 3rd, a Tuesday. There were attacks on it before, during, and after, as we all saw. It turned out that the Russians who had been trying to hack had been hacking, but weren't able, thank goodness, to really do any damage to the process. Now, they've been hacking, Homeland Security and hacking all these other places. And I just think that Donald Trump has let them in the back door, but that's another story for another day. What I do see that has happened here is that even with a democratic process holding firm and the elections going about as smoothly as they ever could go, and Chris Krebs, who has since been fired from his position in CISA, C-I-S-A, had tweeted out that this was the most secure election in the history of the United States. He should know. But as I have posed the question before, it may be true that it was the most secure election in history in the United States. But that does not mean that there was not voter suppression. What happened in terms of the election and what happens in terms of voter suppression, people being prevented from coming to the election in the first place, are two very, very different things. And so I submit to you that the actual voter suppression piece of this still needs to be looked at. And as a matter of fact, voter suppression was going on in real time right before our eyes, with all of these ridiculous, frivolous lawsuits from Donald Trump and the Republicans. Rudy Giuliani, all of these people who now have coronavirus for their troubles are all people who engaged in a coup attempt, and that cannot be overlooked or forgotten. I'm going to be playing you the speech from Joe Biden yesterday. He gave two speeches, one to the general public, one later on to supporters of his and people who voted for him in particular, and the supporters who had been there with him. Now, I didn't start out as a Joe Biden supporter. You know that, for those of you listening. I was someone who supported Bernie Sanders and thought that, I have openly criticized Bernie. I've openly criticized Joe. Both of these individuals have some issues, to say the least. And I'm talking issues politically, and particularly in Joe Biden's case, as far as women are concerned. I mean, I will always say that Joe Biden, in my view, did rape Tara Reade. Look, I've said that before, during, and after. I did a whole podcast episode on Tara Reade. I had done several back in April and May, and even beyond that on Joe Biden and my critical questions about him. Those still remain, by the way. But obviously, when it came to the election and in the weeks and months before the election, when it became clear that Joe Biden was going to be the presumptive nominee, was going to be the representative of the Democratic Party for the presidency, up against a fascist, a dictator, a racist, and someone who had been credibly accused of raping at least 3 women and also of grotesque sexual battery and assault. I mean, those things are, I don't have to say grotesque because sexual assault and battery are grotesque on their face. There was no way that people could actually sit this one out. No chance. When you had kids being ripped from their parents along the border, when you had coronavirus running wild through this country and still running wild through it, when you had all these other things going on, there's no way, even with everything that I've just said about Joe Biden, there was no way that you couldn't vote for the Democratic option. Some people didn't. Some people did sit on the sidelines, not many. Everybody recognized how important it was to get rid of Donald Trump from that White House. Everybody did. But we need to take account of this voter suppression, because that's what Donald Trump was doing before, during, and after. He wanted to throw out all the black voters, all of them. He wanted the, no, you can't, no. We heard the testimony in Michigan last month. I talked to Laura Cronin, had her on as a guest. She was one of the people who testified during the Michigan Board of State canvasses last month, and how important it was to certify those results in Michigan. And she talked pointedly, and she's a white woman, talked pointedly about what was going on in Detroit and the attempts to completely eviscerate the black vote, which is what Donald Trump and these Republicans were doing. And they were doing it right before your eyes. There was no credible lawsuit whatsoever in any of these cases. They've lost over 60 lawsuits. 60. Court after court after court threw them out. This was all about overturning and absolutely desecrating the democratic process, throwing out black votes. This was voter suppression. This was an attempted coup. And I do not think that should ever be forgotten. I do not think it should be just swept under the rug and here we go, let's move on. I do not think that Joe Biden should turn away from this. I do not think that his Justice Department should turn away from this and pretend it didn't happen. There needs to be a full-scale congressional investigation. There needs to be a full-scale accounting of this with the Federal Elections Commission. There needs to be a full-scale accounting of all of this in the Justice Department. And what I do find very interesting is that Joe Biden has not yet named his Attorney General. Who is the Attorney General of the United States going to be? That's something I would advise you to keep an eye on over these next few days. I had been hearing through people that I know that Andrew Cuomo, because I've not been paying attention a lot to the American corporate news media lately. I have decided to take a little bit of a break from it. And what I've been hearing from people who have their ear to the ground on these things is that Andrew Cuomo is among those shortlisted for this Attorney General position. I find that to be profoundly disappointing, to say the least. It is really interesting how we as people in the United States are groomed, and I hate that word for so many reasons. How we are shaped and softened and conditioned to start to fall in love, or at least have some kind of fond or wistful admiration for people who do very destructive and harmful things to us. There is, in some instances, I believe, a Stockholm syndrome type relationship that we are somehow, at least some of us, seduced into. Oh, Andrew Cuomo, he's the darling. Oh, look at him in the pandemic, and oh, his press conferences, and back in March and April, wow, his press conferences. Boy, he could be the president, couldn't he? He'd do a better job than this guy. Well, yeah, of course he'd do a better job than Trump. I think that your 7-year-old could do a better job than Donald Trump. I think that any of us could do a better job than Donald Trump, because Donald Trump did nothing. Donald Trump did nothing. He played golf and tweeted and lied and watched Fox News for 4 years. That's what he did. And said racist and misogynist things for 4 years. I think that a lot of us can do better than that. And I think that even not being in the White House, any of us have done better than that as far as Donald Trump is concerned. I do not think that there needs to be a lot of effort undertaken or required in order to properly foment a very decent counter to the indecency and despicable disgrace of Donald John Trump. I don't think that that requires a bit of effort beyond just being a human being and being a decent one at that. But what I think is very clear is how we, I think, sometimes settle for anything. Now, I get it, and I talked about this with Joe Biden. You know, look, there's lots of things about Joe Biden I do not like. But, again, the election that we've just had is very, very clear to me. There was going to only be one choice, and it was going to be whoever the Democratic nominee was. And the mission was that regardless, we were going to push and still push an agenda that meant really not only transforming the system, but eradicating it, quite frankly, and replacing it with a system that believes in people as the center of it, and not profits and not corporations. There's been a 50-year journey to get to this corporate center, and it has gotten larger and larger and larger, and this pandemic has only revealed it even more, and we already knew it. When you've got billionaires making all this money during this pandemic at record rates, while the 99% of us are basically swimming along if we can, if we have a life preserver, and then the many of the people in that 99% without a job, without a home, without money that they can save for a rainy day, without any of those things that will keep them afloat and give them some kind of peace of mind. So these are things that this is real. This is not a joke. And we get seduced. Oh, Andrew Cuomo is the. Oh, Andrew Cuomo, wouldn't he be a great president? Well, the allegations is that Andrew Cuomo would be a lousy president. I mean, whatever some people may think Joe Biden is, Andrew Cuomo would be even worse. Far worse. Plus, he's accused of sexual harassment. I know. Listen, I'm the one that said all along I believe Tara Reid when it comes to Joe Biden, and I still do. Andrew Cuomo has cut so much from Medicaid, or his budget certainly was going to do that. He has no compassion for people who are in prisons. With this COVID-19 outbreak, he was very indifferent to dealing with that at all in terms of how you're going to get people who are in prisons out to stop the spread of this virus. He didn't care too much about that. He is not somebody that I would want as Attorney General of this country. I definitely would not. And all of his appearances on television, with his brother Chris, ha ha ha, let's have a little Punch and Judy show here with two brothers. I mean, this is not what we want. We don't want this chummy stuff while people are dying. Do you? Do you want chummy buddy while you've got 300,000 people dead from this virus? We can't afford to have people like that as Attorney General. I'd live with Doug Jones in that position. Doug Jones, at least, is a friend to the black community. And certainly over these last 4 years or so, he has been. Doug Jones, who prosecuted the Klan in the bombings of the 16th Street Baptist Church in September of 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama. That was exactly, do you believe that? That was 57 years and exactly 3 months ago today. I mean, time flies, but exactly 57 years and 3 months ago today, that atrocity happened. 4 little girls, 4 black girls, murdered in a cowardly, racist attack. And Doug Jones prosecuted these folks. I think that's the kind of person you would like to have as your attorney general, don't you think? What has Andrew Cuomo ever done for the everyday person? I mean, seriously, what has he ever done? Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. But at least Doug Jones has actually had a track record of actually caring and advocating for people and prosecuting those who do wrong. I mean, Doug Jones should still have his Senate seat in Alabama. And if you're going to put someone white in that position at all, then put Doug Jones there. Put Sally Yates there. You know, these are people I would live with as Attorney General. First and foremost, though, I think a black person should be there. A black man or a black woman should be in that Attorney General spot. I would love it to be Jay Johnson. I thought he was going to be Secretary of Defense. I would love it if Keith Ellison were the Attorney General of this country, even more so. More somebody who really will do something different. And I know he's in the middle of prosecuting these cops in Minneapolis who murdered and lynched George Floyd. But I still think that Keith Ellison would be the exact choice that would, I think, be greatly welcomed. If you want to talk about diversity, you will have it in Keith Ellison. He's a black man. He's a Muslim. He's somebody who's a progressive. I mean, he served in government. He's had a long record in government. I mean, he's the Attorney General of Minnesota. I mean, what more ideal person could you have there in that job after what you've seen, the filth that you've seen from that Attorney General's office these last 4 years? I mean, that filthy, rotten, corrupt, criminal Bill Barr, who should actually be impeached, is going to be leaving that office in the next week or so, December the 23rd. That was announced yesterday. And after all the filth and corruption of 2 different Attorney General tenures for Bill Barr, he's finally going to be out of there. But you need to review the rot of him too. The rot that he has left and what he's done. And you don't do that with an Andrew Cuomo. Maybe you don't even do that with a Doug Jones, quite frankly. You would definitely achieve that with a Keith Ellison. You definitely would. Sally Yates, I'm not so sure of. But the answer to all of this is not to just sweep this stuff under the rug. And I really think that Joe Biden's got to think about this. His comments last week to the NAACP and to Cheryl and Ifill of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund were, to say the least, at best disappointing. At worst, they showed a callous disregard for some of the very people that Joe Biden claims he has his back for. It's more like he's had his back turned to them rather than for us. Time will tell. Time will tell. The lack of diversity in these top positions of power have been glaring. And while there is diversity and inclusion going on, that is mostly happening in second-tier jobs or in deputy positions, such as the Deputy of the Treasury, such as the Council of Economic Advisors chair. I mean, those things are of consequence, but they are not earth-shattering big jobs. And while Linda Thomas Greenfield is indeed the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, which is a really important and very big job, that, to the best of my recollection, is the only job, including, of course, if you include the Department of Homeland Security job held by a Latino. Those are the only real jobs of major consequence that a person of color has in this administration, along with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. But those are the three, basically. And not to mention Office of Management and Budget. That is important, near attendant. But those are the four positions. Everywhere else is white men in major positions. And I know Janet Yellen is the Treasury Secretary as well. She's going to be. But you've got white men in the biggest positions, whether it's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, whether it is Secretary of State Tony Blinken, whether it is Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack. It's just really annoying to me that you bring back Tom Vilsack. Tom Vilsack was part of Obama's administration. And I think he may have been Secretary of State then. Secretary of Agriculture then. Why bring back these retreads? If you want to build back better, and if you want to understand that you are, as you call it, a transformational, or I should say, transitional president, then why are you bringing back people who are in a prior administration? That is not a transitional anything. That is a return to what you had prior to the last 4 years. That is a regression. And I am concerned about that. Because while I am celebrating the fact that the Electoral College did its job, and it's a shame that we have to even celebrate that, we need to scrap the Electoral College. I also am trying to turn the lens and the attention to what we need to do. What we need to do. What we need to do to keep the Biden-Harris administration honest. And I know the corporate news media keeps saying, and I've heard this for months, oh, they've got a lot to do. For weeks, rather, I've heard this. They've got a lot to do. Before I kind of did my self-imposed removal from the American corporate news media for the next foreseeable, I don't know, for a few more days I'm going to do this, and it really works wonders. Less stressful, you're not shouting at your television, you're not throwing things at it, You can put your energies into meditation rather than throwing things at a television set or screaming at it. And I find that when I watch Sky News, I'm not screaming at my TV. But very seriously, we need to put our attention now on, and again, I'll celebrate the inauguration. It's a nice moment for them personally, but we've got to move from the personal to the political and to the people. And that is what we have to start doing, in my estimation. Well, I am going to start doing that now. Because again, we have to have an agenda. It's critical that we do. And you hear it on the news media, at least before I started to move away from the corporate news media here in the U.S. in terms of the cable. They would always say, oh, they've got lots of work to do. Oh, they've got lots of work to do. Yeah, they do have lots of work to do. And that's what any administration always has lots of work to do. Whether there's a pandemic or not, whether there are police murdering black people or not, whether there's voter suppression or not, there's an administration that comes in always has lots of work to do. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be challenged. That doesn't mean that there should not be an agenda that you and I present. I said this a few weeks ago here. Present to yourself, think of the 3 or 4 biggest issues, the issues that matter the most to you. Outline those issues on a piece of paper or on your laptop or whatever it might be that you write on. Put it in your diary that you write in on a daily basis. And organize those 3 issues. What do you want to see? What do you want done? Send that in an email or something to the Biden folks. But also, more importantly even, organize amongst like-minded people. Have Zoom meetings, have YouTube meetings, have FaceTime meetings, whatever it is, and coalesce around the agenda of those issues. Articulate something, what you want to see, build an organization, present this stuff to the Biden administration and Harris administration, interface with other organizations with the same goals and ideas, form partnerships, and present a coalition. Those are the things we need, because we can't just go back to what we had with the Obama administration. And I think that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris recognize that. And I am concerned about Kamala Harris. I am really hoping, and I said this to someone the last couple of days, I am really hoping she is not just going to be, or that she is not going to be a pacifier of black folk. Now, the person I spoke to about this said, Omar, come on now. You know what's going to happen. You're going to be right. That's what I was told. And I'm afraid that I will be. I hope I'm not going to be. And again, I've told the story before about my fear and concern about Senator Harris, now Vice President-elect Harris, about how I think that she could end up being this pacifier, a buffer. And I hope that I'm wrong. I pray that I'm wrong. And when I issued this on Twitter a few weeks ago, I had someone say to me, well, let them get settled in first. And I'm like, I am not this fan of letting someone get settled in. Again, now it's over 300,000 people dead. Many of them black, many of them brown, many of them Native American. There ain't no time to settle in. And again, I've said this before. This ain't about being nice and neat and cute. We've got challenges, and yes, we need to get behind this administration when it does the right thing, but this ain't about cheering an administration. This is about operating an agenda and advocating an agenda for the good of the people, for the good of black people. I mean, that's what this has got to be about. Black folk didn't just vote here to just vote in Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. There is much more on the table than that. This is not about personalities. And I know the corporate news media operates on personality. This is about us. You, me, all of us. Black folk are dying from this virus at record numbers. Latinx people are. Native American people are. Their rates are through the roof. You've got joblessness in this country, homelessness in this country. Those are the kinds of issues we need to start tackling. Foreclosures up the wazoo, evictions, all this moratorium on rent payments, and now the rents coming due. Those moratoriums are barely, are coming to an end. Unemployment benefits coming to an end. You got no stimulus check. You got no bill. You got no check. And it's now Christmas almost. Or whether you celebrate it or not, the fact is it's holiday season. You got a virus running wild. You got people that don't want to put a mask on. You got police killing black folk. You've got black trans people being murdered. We have some real stuff to deal. We've got healthcare you got no healthcare. Healthcare is on a thread now. You don't know what this U.S. Supreme Court's going to do with it. What's happening with the immigration situation? What's happening at the border? Are you going to repatriate these parents and their kids? What's going on with this? There's still people being detained. This wall situation. There's a billion things. What is our agenda? That is the question. You got a woman's right to choose hanging in the balance. Next month, literally 3 days or so after Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are sworn in, There will be yet another anniversary of Roe versus Wade, and more than ever before, that Supreme Court precedent is under attack. You've got some states where there's only one abortion clinic. I think Alabama, maybe one. So we have to articulate an agenda, and we have to have a coalition. Look, listen, we have 81 million plus people who voted for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. 81 million. And stop saying, oh, but 74 million people voted for him. I don't want to give a rat's. I don't care about the 74 million people who lost. We have got to be about our agenda. We have a mandate as much as Joe Biden does. We're the ones. Black people are the ones. Brown people are the ones. Native American people are the ones. And the white people who voted for Joe Biden are the ones who have the mandate here. The people in the streets all summer and fall long in this country and around the world, but in this country, who marched, risked their lives in the pandemic in support of Black Lives Matter and George Floyd's family and Jacob Blake's family and Breonna Taylor's family, Ahmaud Arbery's family, and all these other black people and brown people who were murdered. Black trans lives. I mean, we have an opportunity, folks, to really push this administration that's coming in. And I'm telling you, it's got to be done. Something has got to give here. And the fact that Joe Biden made comments, oh, well, I'm not going to do executive orders. I can't do anything progressive. You know, this is caught by The Intercept, Ryan Grimm of The Intercept last week. Transcripts of some of the stuff that was said in these meetings with the NAACP head Derek Johnson and with Sherilyn Ifill and all these people, part of this group of black folk and civil rights groups. Reverend Sharpton was in the room. Oh, we can't do that, BS to that. You can't be inviting black folk in a room when black folk voted for you and tell those black folk in that room that we can't do progressive things. But then publicly you go out there and say, I'm going to be president of all the people who didn't vote for me as much as those who did. So you're willing to reach out to these noisy, racist, misogynistic, violent Trump supporters, cultists, authoritarian followers. But you now behind the scenes are like, oh, I'm not going to really do anything progressive. I'm not going to do that. Why is it that anybody would be genuflecting and trying to reach out to people who are violent and racist and who do not want to be reached out to? They want to have power. They want to overrun things. They want to destroy things. How do you want to reach out to destroyers? When there was violence in the streets during this summer and fall, and Joe Biden was saying, well, this violence must stop and this looting must stop, but I'm telling you, this is about a protest for Black Lives Matter and racial justice and all of these kinds of things he was saying on the campaign trail and in commercials. And he did condemn the violence of these white racists. But what I want to see now is a real solid push from all of us to push Joe Biden. We just had a coup attempt in this country. That's how close the country is on a knife's edge. In fact, this country's always been on a knife's edge. And I think some of us just haven't realized that until this year. You've got the Cleveland baseball team now saying that they're not going to use that obscene and racist name for its baseball team. We know what happened with the NFL team Washington now calls itself the Washington football team, and I'm sure they will end up having a new name of sorts coming. All of these other sports organizations have to drop any kind of reference to Native American people in the derogatory way that they do it. I think that Chicago NHL team has to do that. Get rid of that logo. Get rid of that name. It's got to happen with the Kansas City football team. Atlanta's baseball team has to do that too. And all the others. It shouldn't take this long. And remember something. You have to remember this, and I'm going to repeat it again and again and again here, that in 2 election cycles, more white people voted for Donald Trump than did not vote for him. That cannot be repeated enough. More white people voted for Donald J. Trump than they did for Hillary Clinton. That's white men and white women. And more white men and more white women voted for Donald J. Trump in 2020 than they did for Joe Biden. So if Joe Biden is going to be saying to black folk, well, we can't do this, we can't do that, and we can't really do these executive orders for progressive things and da-da-da-da-da-da, when most of the white people that he wants to reach out to didn't vote for him and didn't vote for the Democratic candidate in 2 election cycles, then what is this really all about? Is it just about the consecration of power in 2 different political parties? Is that what it's about? I have my own ideas about that. I've expressed on this podcast what I think it is about. But I want to just leave that with you. Is that what it's about? Is it just about, well, one party just wrecks the country and the other party does the cleanup job to get it back to where it was before the wreckage began and before the crash happened and before the destruction of the administrative state happened? And then it just goes back and forth between those 2 things? Is that how it is going to continue to be? Or do you think we really need to actually shake things up to a point where institutionally things are completely different? Because while it is so that you have to protect institutions, and the one I picked to protect was voting, there is still an awful lot of reformation and change that has to be done within that institution. And overall, institutions in America cannot survive as they are presently constituted. They are not going to be able to. And that's where you have despotism and tyranny and coups coming in. Believe me, this was a warning signal. This attack on the American so-called democratic process was a strong warning sign of what I think is to come from these Republicans. And when you have that kind of a challenge, that kind of open, brazen coup attempt, it was a coup attempt. And if you do not face that down with something really serious and severe and strong, and you do not tighten up your laws, you do not issue executive orders, you do not put down guidelines in Congress and get them passed, which is why these 2 Senate races in Georgia, please keep voting Georgia, are so critically important. If you do not stand up and fight back vigorously the way that Jon Ossoff is, particularly Jon Ossoff is fighting against David Perdue, if you don't do that in government, you're going to have a lot of disaffected people again. And what you're going to have is what you had at the end of 2016, people not voting. You're going to have 100 million people say, F it. I busted my ass for Joe Biden, and what have I got for it? What has he done? What has his admin done? We can't have that again. If you do not want that kind of reaction, then I suggest two things. One, you need to keep pushing Joe Biden every day. Celebrate the things that you agree with that he's done well, but keep pushing for your agenda, because that is the only way. It really is. We are going to have to make revolutionary change in this country, especially after 2020. We're going to have to. If you think everything's going to go back to the way it was after this pandemic begins to die down, you better think again. What you're seeing now with technology and Zoom and all this is here to stay. It is here to stay. Movie theaters aren't going to be operational in the same way anymore. They're going to be a lot of them closing down. You're going to be watching movies at home even more. You've got Netflix already. You've got HBO Max, Hulu, Amazon Prime. You've got all these content delivery services already. You've got people delivering food to you already. You're going to have even more restaurants closed down. You've had over 120, almost 120,000 restaurants alone closed down in the U.S., with at least 10,000 more to come if there's no stimulus bill. You have got to put your agenda front and center. We are the richest nation on the planet. There is no reason whatsoever that you should be having homeless people on the streets, people starving, people without a roof over their head, people without health care. There's no reason why we should have only one abortion clinic in a state. There's no reason why we should be tightening up these scrutinies of voters. Why are we scrutinizing? Why are we doing that? Why is there all this voter ID? I know why. It's the 2013 U.S. Supreme Court decision, but I'm asking this more rhetorically. We have all of these things, and then you vote for a $741 billion military bill last week. Bipartisan. That got through quicker than the stimulus bill did. And is this stimulus bill at $908 billion going to be yet another transfer of wealth, where half of it goes to the top 1%? I dare say it will be. You got people starving. You got people on food bank lines for hours. All over the country. Middle class, working class, poor people. You have to start getting involved in this and pushing Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Yeah, I'll celebrate the inauguration. Yeah, I'll have a glass of wine or champagne or beer. I'll do that. But the hard work has to begin now, even before Inauguration Day. And beyond it. You cannot be complacent the way many of you were, many of us were, during the 8 years of Obama. You can't. You have got to participate in this. You've got to keep your eye on 2022. We've got to start thinking about that already. These Republicans are. They're hard at work at it. I guarantee you they are. Very hard at work. I mean, it's just imperative. We can't just go back to sleep now, like we did with Obama. The joint session of the House is going to happen on January the 6th. That's just a day after these two Georgia runoff races. At that point, Wednesday, January 6th, just 2 weeks before the inauguration, there will be an official receiving of the votes from each state that will get announced in the House of Representatives in the joint session. There will be Mike Pence presiding over the session, and it will be official in the House of Representatives as the electors report and record through the House of Representatives, it will be officially done. And that will be the last step of officiality. We already have it official in the Electoral College, so that's all that really matters. But the formality is January the 6th. We need to have an agenda. We need to have an agenda. Whatever that is, and we have a coalition. We have 81 million people. This is something that we have to harness into a movement. You've got the Black Lives Matter movement. You've got gay and straight people. You've got black folk, white folk, Asians, Latinx, Native Americans, all of whom voted for Joe Biden. Progressives, young people. That is an incredible diverse coalition that Joe Biden has. But we have it. We are it. So that means we have to harness strategic thinking, organizational skill and ability, networking, and we have to be intersectional. This moment demands intersectionality. That's how we really become a force to be reckoned with, so that we can present things to Biden and Harris. The same way that some Republican politicians are afraid of these wingnuts, these Trump authoritarian followers, that they're so petrified. They're not afraid of Trump. They're afraid of his voters, but they're not afraid of Trump. They run Trump. They rule Trump. Trump is who these people are. So they've got full control over him. It's not because they're afraid of him. Some might be, but it's not because they're afraid. They're afraid of the voters. So why won't Joe Biden be afraid of us? Not because we're going to do anything violent. That's not what we're going to do. It's about an agenda. He should really be in a position where he looks at us as a group of people collectively saying, oh my goodness, that's a lot of power you have. And you still have that power. 5 weeks after the election was made official by news organizations in name. Now, a day after the Electoral College makes it official, that 81 million of you doesn't go away and go home. You've got power. You still have power. Joe Biden knows it. Kamala Harris knows it. The question is, what are you going to do with that power? And what are you going to do with it? Now, next week, next year, January 20th? What you gonna do? Thank you very much for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.
Look, thousands of Americans are dying a day. Our lives have been turned upside down, and they're doing nothing in Washington. David Perdue had his chance, but he was too busy looking after his stock portfolio. And now he's blocking relief for the rest of us. We can defeat this virus by listening to doctors and scientists. We can pass direct economic relief. We can get our daily lives back, but only if we vote. I'm John Ossoff, and I approve this message.